Look, my name's Ananya, and people think I have the best job in the world. You could pay to eat, Ananya? What a life! They say it at parties, in emails, even my own mother. They don't get it. Not really. For me, it's never been about just good food. My job, my whole life, is about finding the truth. Is this real? And the person who can tell you if the line-caught sea bass on your $200 plate was actually frozen and farmed in a tank in Vietnam. I can tell you if the Himalayan pink salt is just dyed table salt from a warehouse in New Jersey. I'm a food critic for the Global Standard, which sounds way more glamorous than it is. Mostly it's just me, sitting alone, chewing very, very slowly, and trying to find the lie. I can taste the difference between butter from grass-fed Normandy cows and grain-fed Irish cows. I can tell you the specific valley a Pinot Noir grape was grown in just from the finish. My palate is my identity. It's the only thing I've ever had that is 100% reliable. This obsession, it's a whole thing. You're probably thinking I'm nuts. I get it. It's a lot. You have to understand, I wasn't always this intense. I used to just enjoy food. But then, about 8 years ago, there was the incident. That's what I call it in my head. I reviewed this restaurant in Chicago, Livray. The truth. God, the irony. I gave it a perfect review, a perfect score. I wrote about the ethereal whisper of saffron and the deep woodland floor notes of the truffle. I called the chef a genius. I mean, my review made him. It put him on the global map. A year later, an insider blew the whistle. It was all fake. All of it. The saffron was a synthetic compound, a chemical dye. The truffle was a few drops of 2,4-diphthiapentane, a petroleum byproduct, mixed into cheap grapeseed oil. The chef was a chemist, not a chef. A brilliant, total fraud. He didn't just fool the public. He fooled me, my palate. The one thing I have, the one thing I've built my entire life on. He made me a liar. I told millions of people to go eat a lie, and I called it perfection. That messed me up. Bad. For a long time. But after the shame wore off, it just left this cold, hard obsession. Never again. I will never be fooled again. I have to know the source. Which brings me to my current assignment. The big one. The Global Standard is sending me to review Sanguine, the most exclusive, most mysterious restaurant on the planet. You can't book a table. You are invited. It's run by this reclusive genius, Chef Camilla, who nobody has really seen. An assignment like this, it's the ultimate test. My chance to find the real truth. To prove to myself that my palate is still pure. Looking back, I really, really wish I'd refused the assignment. I wish I'd just stayed home. Because I went to Sanguine. I did find the source. And the truth is, some flavors, you're much, much better off not knowing where they come from.
I walk into Sanguine and it's not what you'd expect. No gold, no luxury. It was quiet, minimalist. Polished concrete floors, dark mahogany walls, single flickering candles on tables spaced way too far apart. It felt more like a chapel than a restaurant. It was hushed, The air was cool and smelled faintly of something I couldn't place. Something sweet and metallic. And then Chef Camila came out, not to the room, just to my table. She was exactly what you'd picture, but more so. Mid-40s, pristine white uniform with no wrinkles, hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She was intense but charismatic. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, analytical, like she was deconstructing me. "Welcome, Miss Rao," she said, her voice quiet and hypnotic. "We are so honored. We are here to serve the truth of the ingredient. Nothing else." The food. God, the food. It was transcendent. Every flavor was a high C. Clear, perfect, pure. A carrot dish that tasted more like a carrot than any carrot I'd ever eaten. A fish that tasted like the deep, cold ocean itself. I've never tasted anything like it. My review practically wrote itself. I remember typing a religious experience. But there was one thing. One tiny, nagging thing that stopped it from being perfect, and instead made it haunting. Her signature dish. A simple piece of seared something. She called it the essence. And it came with this dark ruby red sauce. It was incredible. It was sweet, savory, coppery. It had a finish that just buzzed. It lit up my whole palate, made me feel a little euphoric even, warm. And I had no idea what it was. Me, Ananya Rao, the palate, couldn't identify an ingredient. My review was a sensation. The restaurant was rocketed into the stratosphere, and I was a hero. But privately, I was a wreck. It drove me nuts. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. I'd go to other chefs, friends of mine, the best in the world. I'd describe it. It's sweet, but not like sugar. It's coppery, like a faint metallic but velvet finish. And it's warm. It makes you feel warm. They all looked at me like I was crazy. Sounds like a high-end demi-glace, Ananya, maybe with some exotic fruit. It's not a demi-glace. I'd snap at them. It wasn't. It was something new. I tried to replicate it myself. For 2 solid weeks, my apartment kitchen looked like a disaster zone. I tried every spice, every reduction, every animal, aged venison, duck, rare mushrooms. Nothing came close. This is the bad part. One night, I was working late. I'd been reducing a venison stock for about 12 hours. I was exhausted, frustrated, and just angry. I was chopping herbs, not paying attention, and my best knife slipped. I nicked my thumb deep. It bled. A lot. I cursed, rushed to the sink, but not before a few drops, a lot of drops, dripped right into the simmering stock. I was about to throw the whole pot out. It was contaminated, ruined, but I stopped. I don't know why. I was just so tired. I walked back to the stove. The blood had cooked into the sauce. It was darker now. I leaned in just to smell it, and my head swam. That smell! It wasn't right. It smelled good. I dipped a spoon in. My hand was shaking. I told myself, don't be an idiot, Ananya. This is insane. But I had to know. I tasted it, and oh God, it wasn't the same. Not exactly. But for the first time, it was close. That was the scare. Not a monster. Not a ghost. Just me in my own kitchen at 3 a.m. with a bloody thumb stock and a spoon, and I'm thinking, it needs more salt. I threw up for 10 minutes straight. I poured the stock down the drain and ran the garbage disposal for a full minute. I bleached the pot. I bleached the whole kitchen.
I went into denial. Total. It was a fluke, I told myself, scrubbing my hands raw. I was tired. I was projecting. The iron in my blood just mimicked the flavor profile. I was rationalizing, just like I did with Livray all those years ago. I was lying to myself again, because the alternative was unthinkable. It couldn't be. People don't do that. Not in a world-famous, celebrated restaurant. But my palate, my damned traitorous palate, it wouldn't let me rest. It kept whispering. It was close. It was so close. But I had to know. I couldn't just accuse the world's greatest chef of that. Not based on a kitchen accident and a sick feeling. I had to be sure. My sanity depended on it. My identity depended on it. I had to know if I was a critic or if I was an accomplice. I started investigating her suppliers. I pulled every string I had. I called in favors from importers I'd known for a decade. I tried to trace her supply chain. Where was she getting her game, her heirloom produce? It was all a dead end. Her main supplier, the one for her most exclusive ingredients, was a company called Sanguis Logistics. Totally blank. No website, no address, just a P.O. box in a state I'd never heard of. The food just appeared. The invoices were vague, just listing specialty meats and proprietary essence. I was going crazy. I wasn't sleeping. My review was being quoted everywhere, and all I could taste was that taste. I'd be eating a salad, and the metallic tang of the vinaigrette would make me gag. I was jumpy, paranoid. I felt like Livray was happening all over again, but this time, the lie wasn't a chemical. The lie was something so much worse. So I did the only thing I could. I called Chef Camilla's private number, the one she'd given me, in case you ever need to discuss the truth. Chef? I said, my voice trying to be steady. Ananya Rao. I'm doing a follow-up piece for The Standard on your philosophy, on the source. There was this long, cold silence on the line. Not a let me check my schedule silence, a knowing silence. I could just hear her breathing, slow and even. Then her voice, smooth as velvet. Ananya, of course. I've been expecting you. Your palate is everything they say it is. You felt it, didn't you? The truth. My blood ran cold. Why don't you come back? A private demonstration, just for you. You can see the source of everything. That was it. The point of no return. An invitation. Or a trap. I knew in my gut this was a bad idea. Every rational part of my brain screamed to go to the police, go to your editor. But my obsession, that old wound, I couldn't say no. I had to see the truth. I had to know once and for all what I had told the world to eat. So I said, I'll be there tonight. I'm writing this in my car, parked about a block away from Sanguine. It's late after midnight. The street is empty. The restaurant is dark except for a single light way in the back, probably the kitchen. She's waiting for me. I'm going in. If I don't come back, I'm sorry.
but I have to know.
I got out of the car. The street was so quiet, my footsteps echoed, sharp and loud in the night air. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door. It wasn't locked. The dining room was dark. Candles out, chairs all neatly stacked. The silence was thick, heavy. The only light came from the stainless steel double doors to the kitchen, a single bright line, and the smell. It was that sauce, that coppery, sweet, intoxicating smell. It was wafting through the whole restaurant, much stronger than before. It made my mouth water, which made me want to be sick. "Chef," I called out. My voice sounded small and thin. The double doors swung open with a hiss. Camila was standing there. Her pristine white uniform was spotless. She was holding a single glass of deep red wine. She smiled, but it was just her mouth. Her eyes were those same cold, analytical eyes. "Ananya, you're right on time," she said, her voice a hypnotic purr. "Come, you wanted to see the demonstration." I followed her into the kitchen. It was immaculate. I mean, you could perform surgery in there. Every surface was polished steel, reflecting the harsh white overhead lights. It smelled of bleach and that other thing, that sauce, simmering in a massive copper pot on the stove. "You're a purist, Nanya," she said, walking slowly toward the back. "Like me, you understand that all great flavor comes from the source, the life." She stopped at a heavy stainless steel door in the back wall. It looked like a walk-in freezer. "You wrote that my food was transcendent," she said, her hand on the latch. "You were right, but you couldn't figure out why. It's been killing you, hasn't it?" I just stared. I couldn't speak. "The incident, le vrai," she said. My blood went cold. How did you know about that?" "I know everything about you, Ananya. I know you're terrified of being fooled. You came here, to me, looking for the truth." She smiled. "He fooled you with chemicals, a cheap, tawdry lie. My truth is organic. It's the oldest truth there is." She pulled the heavy latch. The door hissed open, releasing a cloud of frigid air that smelled of iron. "This," she said, "is a demonstration." I walked in. It was a larder, a huge refrigerated room. The walls were lined with steel shelves, but there was no food. There were bags, dozens of them, clear plastic bags like IV drips, but larger, all filled with a dark ruby red liquid. Each one was labeled with a clean type sticker from Sanguine Logistics. My stomach just dropped. The cold metallic hum of the refrigeration unit was the only sound. What is this?" I whispered. That I knew. Oh God, I knew. My palate knew. My body knew. "It's the ultimate ingredient," Camila said, filled with passion. "The life force you tasted. It's what makes the sauce fuzz. It's what you felt. You can't replicate it. You can't fake it. It is everything." I looked at a bag. The liquid was thick, viscous. "Blood," I whispered. My legs were shaking. "Human blood." "Of course," she said, like she was explaining what flour was. "Nothing else has this complexity. This is the source, Ananya." And that's when it all hit me. The two, the incident and this, they just slammed together in my head. The ray, the fraud, the chemicals, my humiliation, and Sanguine, the truth, the religious experience. I ate this?" I said, pointing a shaking finger at the bag. "You raved about it," she corrected me, her voice cold. "I told them to eat this." My voice was a raw croak. "I told millions of people."
My fear, it wasn't about monsters. It was about this exact moment. The horrifying realization that my greatest gift, my palate, it wasn't just fooled, it was a liar. It had been an enthusiastic, unwitting accomplice. I was a participant in this grotesque taboo. I wasn't just the victim of a fraud. I was the high priestess. I turned to run. I had to get out. I had to tell someone. I shoved past her, back into the kitchen. I slipped on the polished concrete floor, caught myself on a steel table. "You can't leave me, Ananya," she said. She was right behind me. I scrambled. I grabbed a heavy copper pot and just threw it. It clanged against the wall. She didn't even yell. She just lunged. She was a chef. She was strong. I was a writer. I tried to get to the door, but she grabbed my arm. Her grip was like steel. "My secret is safe, Ananya." She hissed, her face close to mine. "My source is safe." I saw her other hand come up. She was holding a heavy steel saute pan, not a knife, a tool for subduing. The first hit was to my temple, a bright, white, hot pain. I fell. My head hit the steel table leg. The last thing I smelled was the bleach and that sweet, coppery sauce. The last thing I saw was her pristine white uniform, not a single drop on it. Then, black.
A week later, Sanguine is fully booked. There's a hushed reverence in the dining room. A new critic, the one who took over the Global Standards top spot after Ananya Rao's tragic, sudden disappearance, is at the best table. He's a younger man, more impressed by the theater of it all, less obsessed with the why and more with the wow. The restaurant is buzzing with the news of Ananya's vanishing act. Some say a breakdown, some say she just left. The mystique has only grown. Chef Camilla herself brings out the signature dish. The critic is honored. She leans in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "A new refinement for our most honored guests," she says. "A vintage I've been cellaring. It's very special. I call it the critic's cut." The critic smiles, flattered. He takes a bite. His eyes close. He's silent for a full minute. The sauce is beyond words. It has a complexity he's never known, a sharp, intelligent finish that almost seems to speak to him. It's like nothing he has ever tasted. He picks up his pen. "Perfection," he murmurs, writing it down. "Pure, unadulterated truth." He notes the flavor, a subtle, complex, almost poetic new note he can't quite identify. Something familiar, though he can't place it. He writes, "Chef Camilla has done the impossible. She has improved upon perfection." He titles his review, "The Truest Meal."
Thank you so much for watching or listening. Like and subscribe for more nightmares. Your support keeps the darkness from consuming this channel, so we can face the next terrifying story together. Don't be left in the dark.
You know, it's funny what you build your life on. For some people, it's money or family or faith. For me, it was my voice. Just my voice. The way it felt rolling off my tongue, the perfect, crisp enunciation of every consonant, the smooth, resonant flow of every vowel. My name is Nicole, and for a decade, I was the most trusted voice in Sweden. I'd sit in that brightly lit studio in Stockholm, a camera lens staring at me like a great unblinking eye, and I'd speak. I'd speak in Swedish, then pivot to English for an international segment, maybe conduct an interview in French, German, or Spanish. The words were my soldiers, and I was their general, deploying them with perfect precision. People said I had a gift. They had no idea. It wasn't a gift. It was a fortress built brick by painful brick over a childhood of silence and shame. A fortress to keep the memory of a little girl with a mouthful of marbles at bay. A girl who couldn't say her own name without choking on the syllables. My earliest memories aren't of birthday parties or scraped knees. They're of the hot sting of shame. I remember being 6 years old, standing in front of my class, trying to read a simple sentence from a book. The words were right there on the page, clear as day, but my mouth wouldn't obey. It was like a mutiny. My tongue felt thick and clumsy, a useless slab of meat. The S sounds hissed and spat. The R's were swallowed into a garbled mess. The other kids started to giggle, that high-pitched, cruel sound that only children can produce. The teacher's face was a mask of strained pity. I just stood there, my face burning, the words trapped in my throat like birds in a cage, fluttering and dying before they could take flight. That shame became the engine of my life. It drove me through years of grueling speech therapy, hours spent in front of a mirror, my small hands clutching my jaw, forcing my tongue to move in ways that felt alien. I repeated rhymes and tongue twisters until my throat was raw, each correctly pronounced word a small, bloody victory. I became obsessed. I didn't just want to speak. I wanted to master speech itself. I devoured languages, collecting them like trophies. Each new language was another layer of armor, another wall in my fortress. So when I finally sat behind that news desk for the first time, my voice flowing out of the monitors clear and strong, it wasn't just a career. It was my salvation. It was the ultimate proof that I had conquered the broken little girl inside me. I had buried her under a mountain of perfect diction. The first time I heard of Samlaren, the collector, as the international press called him, it was just another story on the teleprompter. A string of gruesome murders unsettling the quiet, orderly suburbs of Uppsala. The details were clinical, as they are always at first. But then came the signature, the detail that made the producers in my earpiece go quiet. The victims, all of them known for their voices, a singer, a politician, a radio host, were found with their tongues missing, not just cut out, but removed with a horrific surgical precision. I remember reading the words, my own voice, my perfect practice voice, describing the horror. But inside, something cold and primal was awakening. The camera zoomed in for a close-up, and I saw my own reflection in the lens, poised, professional, unshaken. But it was a lie. A police sketch of the suspect flashed on the screen behind me, a hunched figure, his eyes wide and manic, a tool belt heavy with gleaming instruments around his waist. He wasn't big or muscular, just wrong. The report said he believed he was performing an act of mercy. He was ending their misery. I finished the broadcast in autopilot, the words flowing perfectly as always. But as I drove home that night, the silence of my car felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, listening. The story wasn't just a story, it was a monster from a forgotten nightmare, and it was whispering my name. It was an attack on the very concept of a voice. And for a woman who had built her entire world on that foundation, it felt like the first tremor of an earthquake that could bring it all crashing down. The little girl with the tangled tongue was screaming inside me, and for the first time in 20 years, I was afraid she was about to break free.
The next few weeks were a blur of escalating fear across the country.
The collector became a national obsession. Every news broadcast, including my own, led with updates on his grotesque spree. He was a ghost, leaving behind nothing but mutilated bodies and a wave of silent terror. The police were helpless, and the public was frantic. For me, it was a slow, creeping poison. Every time I had to say his name, every time I had to describe his methods, it felt like I was scraping a raw nerve. My work, my sanctuary, had become a torture chamber where I was forced to confront my deepest fear night after night in front of millions of people. My carefully constructed composure was beginning to crack at the edges. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in the dark and imagine a hunched shadow standing over me, the glint of scissors in the moonlight. My apartment, a sleek, modern space on the top floor of a secure building in Sodermalm, had always been my refuge. It was a place of quiet control. Now it felt like a glass cage. The sprawling view of the city lights, once a comfort, now seemed to expose me, making me feel like I was on a stage for an audience of one. The fear was irrational, I told myself. He was in Uppsala, nearly an hour's drive away. I was just another journalist reporting a story. There was no connection. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a low hum of anxiety that followed me everywhere, a feeling of being watched, of being listened to. The night it became real for me, I had left the studio late. A storm was rolling in, the sky a bruised purple, and the air was thick with the smell of rain. I remember the sound of my heels clicking on the pavement, an unusually loud and lonely sound in the empty street. When I got to my apartment building, I saw it immediately. A small, square box wrapped in simple brown paper, sitting right in front of the main entrance door. It wasn't at my personal apartment door, but the main entrance to the whole building, which was even stranger. My doorman, Lars, a kindly man with a weathered face, was on this break, so no one had seen who left it. I hesitated. Fan mail was common, but it was always screened at the station. This was different. It felt intentional. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. It was light, almost weightless. There was no address, no stamp, just my name, Nicole, written in the center in letters that looked like they were cut from magazines. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I clutched the box to my chest and hurried inside, the feeling of being watched now so intense it was like a physical touch on the back of my neck. I didn't even take my coat off. I walked into the sterile white of my kitchen and placed the box on the marble island, staring at it as if it were a bomb. My hands trembled as I tore at the paper. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to call the police, to throw it out the window, but I couldn't. I had to know. Inside the brown paper was a simple black box. I lifted the lid. There, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried grass, was a small, desiccated object. It was brownish gray, curled at the edges like an old leaf. It was leathery and hard, and for a long moment my mind refused to process what I was seeing. It was just an object, a piece of something. Then I saw the faint, telltale ridges, the subtle, unmistakable shape of the tip. My breath caught in my throat, a choked, silent gasp. It was a tongue. Not a human one. It was too small for that. It looked like it belonged to a bird. The blood drained from my face and a wave of nausea washed over me. My legs felt weak and I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling. Tucked beneath the gruesome trophy was a small folded piece of paper. It was another collage of cut-out letters. 2 words. For you. That was all. I stared at them, the world shrinking to just that box, that horrifying little token, and those 2 words. The storm broke then, rain lashing against my floor-to-ceiling windows. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated my living room, and in that split second, I saw it. A new file on the desktop of my laptop, which I left open on the coffee table. A single stark file named Practice. My blood rang cold. I hadn't created that file. I stumbled over to the laptop, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I double-clicked it, An audio recording began. It was my voice from earlier that day practicing the very new segment about the collector. But the audio was raw, slightly distorted, and under my own perfectly enunciated words, I could hear something else. A faint, rhythmic sound. Snip, snip, snip. And the sound of quiet, wet breathing. Impossibly close. He hadn't just been watching me. He had been listening. He had been right there.
I slammed the laptop shut with a strangled cry, shoving it away from me so hard it skittered across the glass coffee table and crashed to the floor. The sound of plastic cracking echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the room. A silence broken only by the drumming of the rain and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. My sanctuary was gone, violated. He had been in my home. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, searching the shadows, expecting to see his hunched form emerge from behind my bookshelves, from the dark hallway leading to my bedroom. My skin crawled with the phantom sensation of his gaze. I felt a desperate, primal urge to run, but where? The security I had paid a fortune for, the doorman, the key cards, the top floor solitude? It was all an illusion. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen, and dialed the emergency number. But as the call connected, as I heard the calm, procedural voice of the operator, the words died in my throat. What would I say? That I got a weird package? That a file appeared on my laptop? They would think I was a hysterical celebrity, another public figure cracking under pressure. They wouldn't believe me. The quiet, wet breathing from the recording filled my ears, and with a surge of cold dread, I hung up. I couldn't trust the police. I couldn't trust anyone. He was smarter than them. He was a ghost, and he had just let me know he could touch me whenever he wanted. That night, I didn't sleep in my bed. I huddled in the corner of my living room, a kitchen knife clutched in my white-knuckled fist, watching the windows until the gray, watery light of dawn bled into the sky. The next morning, I was a ghost myself. I went into the studio on autopilot, my face a mask of makeup hiding the dark circles under my eyes. I read the news with perfect, hollow precision. No one noticed anything was wrong. I was so good at wearing the mask, I had forgotten what it felt like to take it off. I told myself it was a prank, a sick, twisted fan who had somehow bypassed security. I deleted the audio file without listening to it again and threw the little black box in a public rubbish bin miles from my home. I wanted to erase it, to pretend it never happened. But denial is a flimsy shield against true fear. The paranoia took root. Every creak of the floorboards in my apartment was him. Every stranger who held my gaze for a second too long on the street was him. The city, my city, began to feel like a cage, and I was the frightened animal pacing its bars. I started my own pathetic investigation, reviewing the security footage from my building's lobby. I watched hours of tape, my eyes burning from the screen, and found nothing. The flicker of static at the exact time the package must have been left. A 10-second gap. It was impossible. A technical glitch, Lars, the doorman, had said. But I knew it wasn't. It was him, a phantom in the machine. He was everywhere and nowhere. The feeling of being watched intensified until I couldn't bear it anymore. I needed to escape. I needed silence. That's what led me to the cabin. My family had owned it for generations, a rustic little box of timber deep in the forests of Dalarna. It was a place from my childhood, a place I hadn't visited in 20 years. It had no internet, barely any cell service.
It was completely isolated, miles from the nearest town. It was, I thought, but one place he couldn't find me. The point of no return. I didn't tell a soul where I was going. I just packed a bag, got in my car, and drove north, leaving my phone behind. The farther I got from Stockholm, the more the knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen. The dense, snow-dusted pines closed in around the road, a silent army of guardians. When I finally arrived, the cabin was just as I remembered it, a dark shape against the perpetual twilight of the Swedish winter. Snow lay in a thick, undisturbed blanket over everything. The silence was absolute. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the day building a fire, the simple physical act a balm to my frayed nerves. As night fell, I sat by the hearth, the warmth of the flames on my face, and watched the snow begin to fall again outside the single large window. I was safe. The thought was so powerful, it almost brought me to tears. And then I saw him. He wasn't in the cabin. He was outside, standing at the edge of the woods, almost perfectly camouflaged against the dark trunks of the pines. A hunched silhouette, motionless. He wasn't looking at the cabin. He was looking right at me. His face was pale in the moonlight, his eyes two wide, dark pools of frantic intensity. A smile stretched his lips, a grotesque, unnatural curve. And on the belt around his waist, I could see them. The scissors, the pliers, the tweezers, an arsenal of gleaming silver tools catching the faint light from my window. He just stood there, watching me, the falling snow dusting his shoulders like a shroud. And I knew I hadn't escaped. I had led myself to the slaughterhouse.
My first instinct was to run, but my legs were frozen, turned to lead by a terror so pure and absolute it felt like ice water flooding my veins. My mind screamed, but my body wouldn't obey. He took a single deliberate step out of the tree line, then another. There was no rush. He moved with the unhurried patience of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. The front door. I had locked it, I was sure of it, but as I watched him approach, a horrifying certainty washed over me. A lock wouldn't stop him. Nothing would. I scrambled backwards, away from the window, my hands searching for a weapon, anything. My fingers closed around a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It was cold and solid in my trembling grasp. It wasn't much, but it was something. The soft crunch of his footsteps and the snow stopped. Silence. A beat of my own thundering heart, then two, then three. Then a sound that made my blood freeze. A faint metallic scraping sound at the door. Not the sound of a key, but of something thin and sharp being worked into the old lock. I retreated further, backing myself into the small, dark corner of the cabin's single room, holding the poker out in front of me like a talisman. The scraping stopped. A soft click echoed in the stillness. The door swung open. He stood there, framed in the doorway, a hunched silhouette against the swirling snow outside. He closed the door gently behind him, sealing us in the suffocating silence. He didn't speak. He just looked at me with those wide, unblinking eyes, the disturbing smile never leaving his haze. For days, that's how it was. He never spoke a word. He would sit in the chair opposite the fireplace, calmly, methodically, sharpening his tools. The scrape of metal on stone was the only sound in the cabin, a grating and nerve-shredding rhythm that drilled into my skull. He would force me to watch as he performed his rituals, his small acts of psychological warfare. He pulled a glass jar from a deep pocket in his coat. It was filled with a clear liquid, and floating inside were dozens of small, shriveled gray things. Tongues.
He would take them out one by one with a pair of long tweezers and clean them with a small brush, his movements precise and reverent. He was preparing a space for a new addition to his collection. My addition. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, amplifying every small sound. The pop of the fire, the drip of melting snow, the frantic beat of my own heart. It was a silence that mocked me. A woman who had built an empire on sound. He was stripping me down, piece by piece, taking away everything I was, even before he took the final prize. The end came on the third day. The fire had died down to glowing embers and the cabin was cold. He rose from his chair, the smile on his face wider, more ecstatic than I had ever seen it. His hands were shaking. It was time. He came towards me, and this time I didn't freeze. A surge of pure, primal adrenaline shot through me. I screamed, a raw, wordless sound of defiance, and swung the iron poker with all the strength I had. I caught him in the shoulder, the impact of jarring up my arm. He grunted, stumbling back a step, but the smile never faltered. He looked at the blossoming red stain on his jacket with a kind of detached curiosity, then looked back at me. His speed was shocking for a man of his posture. He lunged, and my world exploded in pain. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it until I heard a sickening crash. The poker clattered to the floor. He dragged me, kicking and fighting, to the heavy wooden chair he had been sitting in and threw me into it. His strength was inhuman. He held me down with one hand, his face just inches from mine. His breath was sour, hot on my skin. "It's a mercy," he whispered, the first and only words he ever spoke to me. His voice was a dry, rasping hiss. He forced my head back against the chair. I could see the wild, frantic joy in his eyes, the unholy ecstasy of a zealot about to perform his holiest rite. My past and my future collided in that single horrific moment. The little girl with the cup and tangled tongue, the celebrated anchor woman with the golden voice, they were both here, both about to be silenced forever. He forced my mouth open, his rough fingers digging into my cheeks. I saw the glint of the small silver pliers in his other hand. He brought them to my lips. I tried to scream, to bite, to fight, but it was useless. He pinched my tongue, the cold metal sending a jolt of agony through my entire body, just as his father had taught him. He began to pull. The pain was a white-hot nova, a universe of agony that eclipsed everything else. A sound tore from my throat. A sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a life being unmade, of a soul being ripped apart. And then there was only the copper heat taste of blood, and the final horrifying silence.
They found me 2 days later, a local hunter who saw the smoke still trickling from the cabin's chimney. I was huddled in the corner, catatonic. The floorboards around me stained a dark, rusty brown. He was gone. He had taken what he came for and vanished back into the forest, leaving me alive in a tomb of silence. I survived, but the Nicole who had walked into that cabin was dead. The voice that had been my fortress, my weapon, and my salvation was gone. In its place was a gaping, bloody wound and a silence more profound than any I had ever known as a child. The little girl who couldn't speak her own name had won in the end. The shame I had spent a lifetime running from had finally caught me, embodied in a hunched man with a belt full of scissors. But he had underestimated me. He thought my voice was my power. He was wrong. My power was my will. After months of recovery, of learning to live in a world without sound coming from my own lips, I did something no one expected. I went back. I walked back into that brightly lit studio, not to sit behind the anchor's desk, but to stand beside it. I learned sign language,
mastering its fluid, expressive grammar with the same obsessive drive that had once fueled my pursuit of linguistic perfection. My hands became my new tongue. I became the station's primary sign language interpreter. And so my story, once a tale of abject horror, became something else. Every night I appear on the screen, a visible scar on my face from where he held me, a constant reminder of the monster in the woods. But I am not a victim. My hands fly. They dance. They argue. They declare. They tell the stories of the world with the clarity and a passion that my perfect practice voice never could. I found a new way to speak, a new purpose, born from the ashes of my greatest fear. He didn't silence me. He just taught me a new language.
The things you think about when your world is ending is pretty funny. You don't think about the grand speeches or the history books. You think about the small things. The weight of your daughter's head on your shoulder as she sleeps. The smell of your wife's hair when you hold her close. The taste of borscht on a cold winter evening. These are the things that make a life. These were the things that made my life. My name was Nikolai, and I was a patriot. In the year 1961, that word meant something. It was a shield, a purpose. Our great nation, Russia, was locked in a silent, tense dance with the Americans. We were building a new world, a better world, forged in the heart of the atom. And I was one of its architects. I was a nuclear physicist, working on a project so secret, so powerful, that its success would ensure the safety of our motherland for 1,000 years. I believed that. I poured my soul into my work, into the complex equations and the humming machinery, because I knew it was all for them, for my Anya and my little Svetlana. Every night, I would leave the cold, sterile embrace of the laboratory and return to the warmth of my small apartment, a world away from the silent, invisible power I worked with every day. The moment I walked through the door, the weight of the state, the pressure of the project, it all just melted away. There was only the sound of Svetlana's small feet running to greet me, her arms wrapping around my legs, and Anya's soft smile, a smile that could calm the most turbulent seas in my heart. We had a simple life, but it was a good life. It was a life I would have done anything to protect. This drive, this need to be a protector, it wasn't just born out of love. It was born out of fear. A deep, cold fear that had taken root in me when I was just a boy. I remember my grandmother. In her youth, she was a formidable woman, the pillar of our family. But time is a cruel thief. It stole her memories, one by one, leaving her confused and frightened in a world she no longer recognized. Dementia, they called it. I just called it a nightmare. I saw the way my aunts and uncles looked at her. Their eyes, once filled with love and respect, now held a cold, hard glint of impatience. She had become a burden. I'll never forget the day I overheard them in the kitchen, their voices low and conspiratorial. "What are we going to do with her?" my Uncle Dmitri had said, his voice laced with a weariness that bordered on cruelty. "She can't even remember our names. It's too much." They spoke of sending her away, of leaving her to wither in some state-run facility, a place where old people were sent to be forgotten. They wanted to abandon her, their own mother, the woman who had raised them. The thought was a dagger in my young heart. I saw her sitting in her chair by the window, a frail, lost soul, and I made myself a promise, a silent, solemn vow. I would never be like them. I would never turn my back on family. I would stand as a guardian, a shield against the cruelties of the world. My work, the atom, it was my way of fulfilling that vow. It was the power to protect my country and by extension, my family. I was building a fortress around them with science, ensuring that no harm would ever come to them. I was so proud, so foolish. I never imagined that the very thing I believed was their salvation would become my damnation, that the shield I was forging would become the sword that would tear my world apart. The beast I worked with had no face. It had no voice. It was a silent, invisible god sleeping in a tomb of concrete and lead. We called it the core. It was the heart of our project, a seething, incandescent power that we prodded and measured, always careful, always respectful. We all knew the stories, the hushed whispers of accidents at other facilities, of men who got too close, who didn't show the proper respect. Men who walked away feeling fine, only to fall apart from the inside out days later. The Geiger counters were our constant companions, their steady, rhythmic clicking, a sort of prayer, a mantra that kept the invisible monster at bay. We trusted our instruments, we trusted the lead-lined walls, we trusted our math, but deep down, there was always a hum of fear. It was the fear of the unknown, of a force that could unmake a man at a cellular level, turning his own body into his executioner. It was a modern-day demon, one we had summoned ourselves. I suppose I never truly let myself believe it could happen to me. I was meticulous, careful, I followed every protocol. I was a professional. The real fear, the one that kept me awake some nights, was something else. It was the fear of becoming my grandmother, not in mind, but in body. The thought of my own flesh betraying me, of becoming something grotesque, something my own family would recoil from in horror.
The day it happened started like any other. The air in the facility was thick with the usual smells of ozone and sterilized metal. We were running a series of calibration tests, pushing the reactor to a higher output than ever before. There was pressure from above, of course. The Americans were making progress, and we couldn't fall behind. The schedule was aggressive, and corners, I fear, were being cut in the name of progress. I was in the control room with my colleague, Dmitri, monitoring the feedback from the core. The low hum of the machinery was the facility's heartbeat, a sound so familiar it was almost comforting. Then it changed. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the console, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. A small red light began to flash, an insistent, angry pulse. "Coolant pressure fluctuation in sector gamma," Dmitri said, his voice tight. It was my sector. The protocols were clear. Initiate an immediate shutdown. But a shutdown would mean weeks of delays, endless reports, and questions from superiors who did not appreciate failure. "It's a sensor ghost," he said, a little too quickly. "It's happened before. Let's just recalibrate the flow." He was my senior, a man I respected. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the shutdown sequence. The alarm shrieked. "Nikolai, we don't have time. A manual valve adjustment will fix it. Go! I'll override the alarm from here." Against my better judgment, I went. The corridor leading to the reactor chamber was a long concrete tunnel, the air growing warmer with each step. The valve was in a small antechamber, separated from the core by a thick lead and plaster wall. As I entered the room, I felt it. A strange, prickling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 tiny needles. The air tasted metallic, coppery, like sucking on an old coin. And then I saw it. In the corner of my eye, a flash of the most brilliant, ethereal blue light, shimmering in the air for just a second before vanishing. It was the Cherenkov glow, the sign of raw, unshielded radiation. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I knew what it meant. A leak. A serious one. I threw my weight against the heavy valve, turning it with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The shrieking of the alarm back in the control room died down, replaced by the steady, familiar hum. It was over in less than a minute. I stumbled back into the control room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dmitri was wiping sweat from his brow, a relieved smile on his face. "See? Just a sticky valve. Good work, Kolya." He clapped me on the shoulder. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the blue light, the taste in the air. But I couldn't. What would I say? That I imagined it? That I was panicking over nothing? We filed the report as a minor mechanical fault. A sticky valve. No mention of the alarm override. No mention of the blue light. No mention of the metallic taste that I couldn't get out of my mouth. I had walked into the dragon's lair, and I was terrified it had breathed its fire on me. That night, I went home and held my family tighter than ever before. I breathed in the scent of Anya's shampoo, the sweet, milky smell of Svetlana's fare. I tried to act normal. I told them my day was uneventful, just another day at the office. But I was a liar. I felt a strange internal vibration, a low-level hum beneath my skin that wouldn't go away. A headache began to throb behind my eyes. I told myself it was just stress, the adrenaline from the incident wearing off. But as I helped Anya with the dishes, I saw my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My face looked pale, waxy. My eyes seemed sunken, darker than usual. I was just tired, I told myself, exhausted. Later in the bathroom, I scrubbed my hands until they were raw, the soap and hot water doing nothing to wash away the feeling of invisible filth that clung to me. I looked at myself in the mirror, searching for any sign, any proof that my fear was just in my head. I looked the same, didn't I? I saw nothing, absolutely nothing, but I could feel it, a coolness spreading from my core, a deep cellular wrongness. It was a poison of the soul, and I knew with a certainty that defied all logic and reason that I had brought the beast home with me. It was inside me now, a silent passenger, waiting, and I was utterly, completely alone with my terror. A week went by. The headache faded, and the buzzing under my skin subsided. I began to convince myself I had imagined it all. The stress of the job, the pressure from our superiors, it was getting to me. I had overreacted. Life returned to its gentle, comforting rhythm. I played with Svetlana in the park, I held Anya's hand on our evening walks, and the fear began to recede, becoming a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. The incident at the lab was never spoken of again. The sticky valve was replaced, and the project moved forward. I was fine. I had to be fine. Then came the morning when it all began to unravel. I was in the bathroom, shaving. I was humming a little tune Anya liked. The warm water felt good on my skin. As I wiped the shaving cream from my jaw, I noticed it. A small red patch on my forearm, just below the elbow. It looked like a sunburn, but I hadn't been in the sun. It didn't hurt, but it itched. An insistent, maddening itch that I couldn't satisfy. I scratched at it absently, and then I looked down at my hand. A piece of my skin, about the size of a kopeck coin, had flaked off and was stuck to my fingertip. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Underneath, the flesh was raw, pink, and weeping a clear, oily fluid. There was no blood. The metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth, so strong that it made me gag. I dropped the razor. It clattered into the porcelain sink with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent apartment. I brought my finger closer to my face, my hand shaking uncontrollably,
It was my skin, a piece of me. It was wet, translucent, and utterly alien. The humming in my body returned, louder this time, a symphony of decay. I looked from the sliver of flesh on my finger to the weeping sore on my arm, and then to my own terrified eyes in the mirror. This was it, the quiet beginning of the end. The beast was awake. It was hungry, and it was starting to eat.
I quickly hid my arm under my sleeve, my heart at frantic birth beating against my ribs. Anya was still sleeping. Svetlana was in her little bed, dreaming of whatever wonderful things 7-year-olds dream of. I couldn't let them see. Not yet. I spent the day in a state of quiet, hyper-vigilant terror. At work, I wore long sleeves, a constant clammy pressure against the weeping lesion on my arm. Every few hours, I would lock myself in a washroom stall, my hands trembling as I unwrapped the crude bandage I'd fashioned from gauze and medical tape. The patch was growing. The redness had spread, and the center of the wound was now a deeper, angrier shade of crimson, like a sunset on a dying world. The skin around it was puffy and blistered, and the clear fluid continued to ooze through the gauze with an alarming speed. The smell was the worst part. It was a sweet, sickly odor, like rotting fruit mixed with something chemical, something sterile and wrong. It was the smell of my own body decomposing while I was still living in it. I would stare at my arm, at this grotesque blossoming of decay, and a cold, calm certainty would settle over me. This wasn't an infection. It wasn't a rash. This was the blue light. This was the metallic taste. This was the invisible fire I had walked through, and it was now burning me from the inside out. My mind, the logical, scientific mind that I had always trusted, was screaming at me. Radiation burn, acute exposure. But my heart, the terrified, desperate heart of a husband and a father, refused to listen. It couldn't be, because if it was, then my life as I knew it was over. And worse, much worse. I might have brought this curse, this invisible poison, into my home, into their lives.
Weeks passed. The test was a resounding success. The newspapers were filled with triumphant headlines, and Commander Volkov was decorated as a hero of the Soviet Union. I received a quiet commendation and a small bonus. I was a patriot who had done his part. But the fire I had walked through was now consuming me. My apartment, once a sanctuary of warmth and love, had become a living tomb, a sick room where I was the sole decaying patient. The man who shaved in the mirror every morning was a stranger, a grotesque parody of the person I once was. The radiation burns were no longer isolated patches. They were a roadmap of my ruin, covering my body in a quilt of weeping sores and blackened flesh. My skin, my own skin, was sloughing off in wet gelatinous sheets, revealing the raw muscle and sinew beneath. The smell, that sweet, sickly smell of my own decay, clung to everything. The furniture, the curtains, my wife's clothes. I could no longer hide it. I was a walking, breathing monument to my own failure, a horror show confined to our small 2-room apartment. Anya and Svetlana were my unwilling audience. They tried, God, they tried. Anya would bring me food I couldn't eat, her hands shaking, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Svetlana, my little light, would stand in the doorway of my room, her small face a mixture of fear and a heartbreaking, childlike pity. She didn't run to me anymore.
How could she? The arms that had once lifted her up to the sky were now raw, twisted things barely recognizable as human limbs. My face was a melting mask, my features slowly dissolving, my eyes milky white and sunken into the skeletal frame that was emerging from the ruins of my flesh. My deepest fear had come to life. I was my grandmother. I was the burden. I was the object of fear and disgust, the reason for the hushed, terrified whispers that now filled our home. I was being abandoned, not by being sent away, but by becoming something so monstrous that love itself could not bridge the gap. One evening I was sitting in my chair, wrapped in blankets that did little to warm the profound cellular cold that had taken root in me. Anya was in the kitchen, her quiet sobs a constant tragic soundtrack to our lives. Svetlana crept into the room holding her small, warm teddy bear. She stood a few feet away, her eyes wide, with a terrible, innocent curiosity. In my mind, in the fading echo of the man I used to be, I was still her father, her protector. My love for her was the one thing the radiation hadn't been able to touch, the last pure thing in my rotting shell. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that her papa was still here. I tried to speak, but the sound that came out was a wet, gurgling rasp. I tried to smile, but the muscles in my face no longer obeyed. So I did the only thing I could. I tried to reach for her. I lifted my hand, a gesture that had once been a promise of comfort and safety. But the thing that rose from the blankets was not a hand. It was a grotesque, malformed claw of exposed bone and dripping flesh. I recoiled from my own body, a wave of self-loathing so powerful it almost stopped my heart. As I pulled my arm back, a piece of my forearm, a wet gray piece of what was once me, detached and fell. It was a small thing, but it fell with the weight of a dying star. It landed on Svetlana's cheek. She didn't scream. She just stood there, her eyes blinking, a look of confused surprise on her face. And then I saw it. The spot where my flesh had touched hers began to turn red, an angry, violent red. It was not a blush, it was a burn. Her perfect porcelain skin was blistering before my very eyes. The beast, the invisible fire that was consuming me, had passed through me. I had become its vessel. I had become the weapon. In my final, desperate act of love, I had poisoned my own child. The shield had not just failed, it had become the sword. I, her protector, was her destroyer. The sound finally tore from my throat, a sound of such utter despair and horror that it was no longer human. It was the sound of a damned soul realizing its own damnation.
I don't remember much after that. My world dissolved into a fever dream of pain and shadow. I was aware of hushed voices, of being carried on a stretcher, of the cold, sterile smell of a hospital. My last coherent thought was of Svetlana's face, of the red mark blossoming on her cheek. A few weeks after I was gone, after the fire inside me had finally consumed the last of what I was, Anya sat on a hard bench in a hospital corridor. Svetlana was in one room, our young son, Alexei, in another. They were both sick, a strange, wasting illness the doctors couldn't explain. A man in a crisp white coat, his face impassive and detached, approached her holding a clipboard. He didn't sit down. He spoke to her in a cold, clinical tone, his words precise and devoid of any human warmth. "We have the test results, Comrade Petrova." He said, "It is advanced radiation poisoning, systemic. There is significant cellular decay." Anya stared at him, not comprehending. The doctor continued, his voice unchanging. "Their bodies are failing from the inside out. I'm afraid there is nothing we can do. It will be slow." Anya looked from the doctor's cold eyes to the closed doors of her children's rooms, and she understood. She understood the sticky valve, the long hours, the commendation. She understood the smell that had clung to me, the way I had flinched from her touch. She understood the red mark on Svetlana's cheek. It was all a single, horrifying picture. The weight of it, the sheer, unimaginable cruelty of it broke her. She fell from the bench onto her knees on the cold, polished floor, a silent, guttural scream tearing from her throat, a sound that no one paid any attention to. My life's work, my solemn vow, born from the fear of seeing my grandmother abandoned, had come to its full, tragic circle. I had feared becoming a burden my family would want to leave behind. Instead, I became a contagion that ensured they could never leave, a poison that would follow them to their own slow, agonizing graves. My love was the weapon. My protection was the curse. And my greatest fear wasn't just realized, it was gifted. A final, horrific inheritance to the very people I had died trying to save.